This is not only a transformational medicine, but this is a game changer in asthma care.
We're hearing from physicians saying we will use this as a first-line medicine because patients want it.
I'm really struck by everything it took to get Exdensur to where we are today. I can only imagine how much pride you must be feeling. Hello everyone, I'm Oisa Momo and welcome to the second episode of our Life Changers podcast. Today we're very excited to be discussing Exdensur, the first and only ultra-long-acting biologic for severe asthma and chronic rhinosinusitis with nasal polyps. This is a story of how science, persistence and strategy combined to turn a lab discovery into a life-changing medicine for patients. I'm joined today by my colleagues Carol Marshall and Martin Arecchia. Do you want to introduce yourselves?
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. I am the Medicine Development Leader for Depemokimab Exdensur.
And Martin?
Yeah, hi, Oisa. My name is Martin Arecchia. So I am one of the team leaders working in a large molecules research unit that is in Stevenage, UK. When people ask me, what do you do? I normally say I work in the kitchen of GSK because we design the next generation medicines. I was also the person that led the team that discovered this amazing medicine.
So we're here to talk about Exdensur, which has now been approved in the US for severe asthma and lots of other markets too for severe asthma and nasal polyps. Carol, can you tell me a bit about what it's like for people living with severe asthma?
Sure. So let's start with a lot of people have asthma, right? 350 million, more than that. We're talking about a severe form of asthma. And this asthma is driven by type 2 inflammation. It's a specific type of inflammation. When that inflammation is out of control, these patients, their asthma gets worse, their symptoms worsen. So you'll see more wheezing, more coughing, the tightness in their chest, the inability to breathe. Where is my next breath coming from? Now, this inflammation, when it's not controlled, leads to worsening of the asthma condition, the symptoms that the patient experiences. It leads to lung damage, lung function decline, and disease progression. And what I mean by that is actually this is irreversible. So we want to avoid it right at the beginning. We want to avoid that lung damage that's caused by this type 2 inflammation. And these exacerbations can be absolutely devastating for patients. They can end up in the emergency department, they can end up in hospital. But really, these affect their daily lives.
So just to be clear, when we're talking about exacerbations, that's worsening of symptoms. People might know it as flare-ups or attacks, right?
That's right. Now, we have a lot of medicines out there for asthma, whether it's your inhalers or even some of the biologics out there now, but we still see patients exacerbating. And thus we need more effective treatments.
Absolutely.
And that's where Exdensur comes in.
Fantastic. And what about chronic rhinosinusitis with nasal polyps?
Yeah, so this is not as common as asthma. There's only about 4% of the population have chronic rhinosinusitis with nasal polyps. We'll just call it nasal polyps, shall we?
Very good.
Now, this also is driven by inflammation, but this is of the nasal passages in the sinuses. So if you can think of that worst cold you've ever had, where your nose is blocked, it's running, your face is exploding with sinus pain, you probably can't sleep, you can't smell, you can't taste. Now imagine having that not just for 3 or 4 days of a cold, but every single day of the year, right? It's miserable. And nasal polyps, part of it is these little growths, soft growths that you get within your nasal passages and sinuses. And about 60% of patients with nasal polyps have them removed by surgery. And that relieves the symptoms for a little while, but it doesn't really impact overall that underlying inflammation. And what we find is 40% of these patients, their nasal polyps have recurred within 18 months. So they're going back again, more surgery. Every time you have surgery, there's a risk, right? and scarring and mucosal damage. And it does become, again, a vicious cycle. One of the common treatments for asthma exacerbations or nasal polyps symptom flare-ups is systemic corticosteroids. These are unpredictable, and we know that they can be detrimental for patients. So we want to avoid these. The burden on patients cannot be underestimated with these diseases. So again, this unmet need
it's
that
huge.
we're trying to solve for.
And it's something that we take for granted. And to hear that description of people suffering on a day-to-day basis, it's really eye-opening. One person who's been living with severe asthma is our GSK colleague, Michael Moyna. Let's hear about his experience.
My name is Michael Moyna. I work in respiratory sales in Western Canada. I'm also a severe asthma patient. I was born in Northern Ireland, in Belfast, in 1975. We didn't have a word for asthma back then. It was just, Michael's not a kid that can breathe well. Michael is wheezing again. That's tough. When all you want to do is run on the cross-country team, I couldn't run. It was obvious that I couldn't breathe. I just accepted that I would find ways around my life and live with asthma at the same time. 20 years ago, I settled on Vancouver Island. And I remember sitting in the playground with my medication in my hand and watching my young daughter on the swing. But there was that fear that if she falls off, you have to run over there and help her. I didn't know if I could. My asthma was in control of whether or not I could move. I think that was a turning point. If I was going to be a better parent, asthma needed to become the passenger and no longer the driver in my life.
I mean, it's so powerful hearing Michael talk about his lived experience of severe asthma. Martin, maybe if we come to you, how does Exdensur make a difference for patients living with severe asthma?
Let's think about what happened 40 or perhaps 50 years ago when patients suffering from severe asthma, they need to take an inhaler multiple times a day. As time passed by and new medicines became available, perhaps that frequency drops to once daily. But now everything has changed with the pimorkimab. The pimorkimab, as known as the commercial name of Exdensur, is GSK first ultra-long-acting biologic. With the pimorkimab, the dosing interval is just twice a year. But what is a biologic? So the pimorkimab is a monoclonal antibody, which is a type of biological medicine. So they are produced by living organisms, such as cells. So the way the pimorkimab works is that binds and neutralizes IL-5. So IL-5 is interleukin-5, a molecule that signals certain type of cells called eosinophils to drive inflammation in the lungs. So this is a bit of a multi-step approach. So by using the pimorkimab and blocking the action of IL-5, as a consequence of that, the eosinophilic count, the number of cells that they are causing the inflammation, just drop.
And is that why we see that suppression that Carol was talking about of inflammation?
Absolutely.
Right.
So that makes patients to have a reduced inflammation, but mostly to breathe better. But what makes this medicine special? So the pimorkimab remain in the body for a long period of time, and that keeps the inflammation levels in the lungs under control. Patients suffer less asthmatic episodes, maybe fewer visits to the hospital, but mostly they can have their life under control again.
And Carol, I'm sure you've come across lots of patient stories about the impact that Exdensur has on them. Can you tell us a bit more?
Sure. So what we have with Exdensur is a medicine that is going to be taken twice a year. Imagine the difference that for 6 months, you can forget about taking a medicine. You can forget about your exacerbations or your symptoms. Now, One of the things that we have discovered when we've been out talking to patients and our physicians in this space is patients don't always take their medicine as they should do. And we all know that, right? If you've got a medicine that you've got to take every 2 weeks or every 4 weeks, and it's an injection, and it's got to be taken out of the fridge, or you've got to go to the clinic to have it, that's quite a burden on you. Something like 80% of people on their biologics do not take it as they should.
Wow.
They think they're better because their symptoms are under control. They forget what they were like before they started on their biologic. So what we are hearing from patients and physicians is that if they only have to take the drug every 6 months, twice yearly, they might actually just keep doing that because it's not such a burden on them. They don't have to go to the clinic every couple of weeks. They don't have to have their fridge full of these quite bulky injectors.
Right.
Yeah. And you imagine going on holiday. You're going on a long holiday and you've got to get all of your medicine before you go. You've got to have it stored in some sort of cold pack in a fridge somewhere. And you're not going to need that with Exdensur.
Wow.
Transformational.
Absolutely. And that prevention, I suppose, is what we're talking about. That prevention of lung damage, of further exacerbations, of stays in hospital. I mean, that's beneficial for the patient, but also for the health system that they sit in, right?
Absolutely. What we see with the healthcare systems, if you think about all of the things that go around having an injectable medicine, whether it's traveling to the clinic, whether it's the nurses prepping the device, etc., all of the costs that go around that diminished so much with a 6-monthly injection. And we mustn't forget the burden on patients when they're suffering with both these diseases, severe asthma and nasal polyps. Going to hospital, taking time out of your day because you're not feeling well, having to go to the emergency department. This all just takes time. It's a burden.
This is not only a transformational medicine, but this is a game changer in asthma care because you are bringing life back to patients. So I think that this is going to change completely this space.
And certainly that's what we're hearing from physicians saying, we will use this as a first-line medicine because patients want it.
Martin, let's talk about how we got to where we are today with depemokimab. I understand that the asset was developed in Stevenage. Can you tell us a bit about the origin story?
The research and the program work started around 2014, and that was the time I joined the team with a team of amazing scientists to generate a molecule that has to be potent enough to enable what we were saying before, to enable 6 months dosing interval. That was beyond ambitious. At the time, we didn't have a method on place that could deliver such a potent molecule. The way we work was we designed 4 billion different engineered versions of the molecule. 4 billion is a 4 followed by 9 zeros. So by combining molecular biology and cutting-edge platform, we were able to screen all these molecules in a very short period of time. Because having a molecule doesn't give you a medicine. So there are so many attributes that you have to keep in consideration. So let's talk about stability of the molecule. So why stability is so important? Because you need to transport that molecule to every corner of the world. And then patients have to keep that molecule in a fridge at home. And then the molecule also needs to be formulated to some concentration as well. So that attribute, that developability property has to be spot on. Once you have that, you need to express this molecule. So this is a biologic derived from living cells. So you need to develop a method, an unstable cell line that is able to express this medicine at a large scale. And that is not a simple process. So we did some in vivo studies on the molecules, and the results on that study confirmed that the molecule was remaining in circulation. So it was able to sustain a reduction of eosinophils. And now it's a bit of an eureka moment.
How did you feel when you found that out?
It's very difficult to describe because, for people like me that they are working at such an early stage on the development process, the percentage of molecules that make it through is very little.
Absolutely.
So to have the privilege to have a moment like that, I think it's a one-in-a-lifetime experience.
Martin, I think you've perfectly described our GSK strategy, and what it is we're trying to do in R&D. You've talked about the science, your eureka moment. You've talked about applying technology. We wouldn't have been able to do it without that. But then we also needed the expertise, the outstanding talent, your team that you've talked about too. And all of that has somehow come together to bring this life-changing medicine to patients. It's
Absolutely.
fantastic.
I think there's also a bit of vision that went on before that, which came from the respiratory leadership team who said, we're pretty good at antibodies at GSK. Could we do more for patients? What if? And they asked that question of whether we could do that longer dosing. They challenged Martin and the team to go for that 6 months. It's never been done before. So I think that vision starting it all off was quite something. And then to be able to execute it.
Absolutely.
Phenomenal.
Absolutely.
What I can tell you, Orisa, is that we have been actively working, very challenging, very intense, perhaps the most intense days of my scientific career.
And that intensity that you've described, Martin, I imagine that carried on throughout the whole programme, Carol. That acceleration, the pace, the focus, the ambition. Can you tell us more?
Certainly in the latter years it did. But before that, GSK's always been at the forefront of innovation in the respiratory space, and Depemokimab Exdensur, no exception to that. We did some modelling to understand what dose we would require, and with that modelling, we were able to skip phase 2, go straight into phase 3, not just with one indication, but with 4, almost simultaneously. So that in itself is, quite novel, quite unique. Our manufacturing development team developed a whole new manufacturing process for this product. The way we accelerated our clinical studies as much as we could, particularly with nasal polyps. And the result of that was that we could file both asthma and nasal polyps simultaneously.
Wow.
That's a first for GSK. And not only that, we filed in our 4 major markets simultaneously. Again, a first for GSK.
Wow. What was it, do you think, that enabled that way of working?
I would say that the one thing that we always came back to was it was never, we can't do it. It was always, how do we make it happen? So all the way along the path, we've been doing things differently. And I have to say this all came about because of an incredible team of people who worked together across geographies. I mean, bringing Japan and China in so that we could file in those 2 countries at the same time as US and Europe. That was just such an experience for all of us, and such great, energetic teams made it happen.
Patients are waiting. That's why we're here. Carol, are there any specific milestones or memories that you remember along this Depi journey?
So we were expecting our first approval to come from the US. We had a date. The US always sets a date. The day before that, we got an approval from the UK.
I remember this. I was shocked.
Now, after I had danced around the kitchen, maybe shed a tear or two, one of the first things I did was send a message to my friend here, Martin, to say, we did it. Your molecule is now licensed for patients.
Wow.
And that was a real kind of moment for me.
And how special. I mean, it's, Martin, how special. And knowing the story of where this asset has come from, it must have meant so much to both of you.
Absolutely.
Martin, tell us, how did you feel when Carol told you the news?
You don't get to experience this many times, or even ever, while you are working in science. So, I mean, it was very, very unique, very intense, as you can say, and you can see as well. So, yeah, it was incredible.
Wow. I can only imagine the pride from both of you.
Absolutely. I'm going to pick out one other big moment, actually. Again, I'm going to go back to the US launch meeting. We were sitting there and, there were 1,000 people in the room, and they showed a video of the first commercial batch of Exdensur leaving Barnard Castle, our site in the north of England, on the 23rd of December last year. And it was heading off to the airport to be split into 2 planes to head off to the US, to fill the channels in the US to enable patients to get that drug. So that's like that reality moment of, this is a medicine. We have done this.
Exactly.
And now we are handing the baton over to the commercial team to get it out to patients.
Wow. Carol, how important is it for the company?
Very important. Our target is over £3 billion peak year sales. So that's pretty big.
So, Martin, tell me, what's next for GSK in the recipe space?
So the idea is to harness the data using artificial intelligence and machine learning tools, AI/ML, to accelerate the process.
We're using AI/ML to really understand our data. We've used it to help design our next indication, which is COPD. So we started trials in COPD last year. We have a lot of ambition to build on our ultra-long-acting portfolio, and what we've learned recently will be applied going forwards across other respiratory diseases.
This is a real innovation story. Can you tell me a bit about what we've learnt along the way?
There's no script for this. Every day it's something new, and I have learned so much along the way. But really, really importantly, it's the people. It's always been about the people, being surrounded by experts, people who listen, people who challenge, people who come up with great ideas. That's what's made the Depemokimab, the Exdensur team, really special and just so much fun to work with. This has really changed my life, and I hope beyond anything that it is changing other people's lives as well.
So that brings us to the end. Thank you so much, Martin and Carol, for joining us today.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the invitation and for giving an opportunity and a voice for scientists that they are working at such an early stage of the process.
And thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed the podcast, then please do look out for more stories on the Life Changers Nucleus page, or share this with a colleague using the hashtag GSK Life Changers on WorkVivo. If there's anything else that you'd like to hear, then please do let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts.